All right, so we're going to be looking at 9b, displaying and describing categorical data. So the first thing we need to know is there are two ways that we're going to describe and display the data. And the first one is the most basic one, and it's something called a frequency table. So you're just going to create a table of values that represents what you found when you performed your survey. So this simply records, oops, I can't spell, records how often or frequently each response occurs. So you're just going to be talking about how often it happened, how many yeses you got, how many no's you got. Okay? Now, depending on the type of work you're given, sometimes you're going to want this as a percent. So these are generally given as a percent, which is why I want you to have your calculators. Now, to make these tables, the steps, the first thing you want to do is, if you have a large amount of data, then you can make a tally. So this is not always necessary. If you just have 7 responses or something, you can count those easily. But if you have a lot of responses, which you're going to see the data sets on some of these are quite large, you're going to want to make a tally. Do you remember making a tally? You're just making marks when you get 5, right? You've done this a million times. If you make a tally, then it just simply makes the information a lot easier to then find the total numbers, right? Second, you're going to create a table. Now, let me warn you that these problems are considered to be quite easy, so when you make the table, it's not going to be worth very many points, but some of the points are going to revolve around just the labels. If you don't have the correct titles and labels on your table, then you're going to lose one of the 3 points, and that can add up quickly. So make sure that you're very careful when you're creating these. So you might want to make a little note to remind yourself to label everything. That is the number one mistake that students make when they're working with these. All right? So let's look at what a table for a frequency table would look like. You're simply going to have a table divided into 3 sections. At the top, you'll put a title. So you're measuring lunch choices on a given day, or students who drink coffee, whatever. Sometimes the title will be given to you, sometimes you'll just have to create something, make something up, right? You're going to have your main category here. For example, you might be looking at different menu items at a restaurant, okay? So, and how often people chose those. That would be your main category, the menu items. Then each individual response will get its own row. The second column will be the frequency of the event. And you can get that from your tally or from just counting if the numbers are smaller. So these will be just numbers, the frequency, how often it occurred. And the last column is going to be the percentages. And that is probably the most important column because generally you hear these things as percentages. 35% of the people chose chocolate ice cream, for example, right? So, and at the bottom, these 2 columns are going to have totals. And those are also important. The frequency total is critical to being able to find the percentages. If you don't have a frequency total, then you can't find the percentages. Right? So after you've created your table, your third step is to fill in your frequencies. Okay. And add to get your total. And then finally, fill in the percentages. To get your percentages, that's simply the frequency divided by the total. So whatever number you have up here, divided by this total that you just found. And then to turn it into a percent, you multiply by 100%, but also remember that multiplying by 100% simply moves the decimal 2 places to the right, makes it bigger. So if you don't want to multiply by percent, simply move the decimal 2 places to the right. Now you'll notice that the percentages also get a total. So that's your last thing. And when you add those together, you're generally not going to get 100%. And the reason for that is when we're doing percentages, you'll usually be rounding, and that rounding error usually means that you're going to get like 99.9% instead of 100%. Some things you'll get 100% if there's not much rounding. But if there's a lot of rounding going on, then it won't always add to 100%. But you should get darn close. If you don't, then you know you've got a problem. Okay? And that's all there is to it. So let's just jump over to the book, and we're just going to look at one of these because these are very visual. I want you to see exactly how these are created and what each piece looks like, and especially the labeling. It's the most common mistake made. Okay? So, just look at example 1. Constructing a frequency table for categorical data. 30 children chose a sandwich, a salad, or a pie for lunch, which is nice. 30 children means they've already done a total for you. That's not always going to be the case. So there's a long list of the items that they chose. You're going to construct a table for the data showing both frequency and percent frequency. When you're choosing them, again, easiest way to do that is to go ahead and create the chart and then do a tally. If you want, you can even create a tally column in your chart. It would not be wrong. For example, say you were making the chart for this. You did the category, and then you put a tally, then the frequency, then the percent. Many of these have a place for the tally. Fine. If not, just go off to the side and make it and do it on the side. So you just go through and check. So sandwich, salad. Yep, we're going to just do a tally off to the side. So what are the choices? Salad, sandwich, pie. So one sandwich, one salad, another salad. You get the idea here, right? Just making a tally. And then you can count them up, and the total of each one is going to be your frequency. Yeah? Stay focused. It's not a very organized list. So you've got to really make sure that you're careful when you're making your tally. Okay. All right. Once you've done that, then you can start putting the values into your chart. You'll see that they did not do a title for this, but it would be safer if you just go ahead and get used to creating a title anyway, even if they don't. So we might title this, you could just title it lunch choices, but some type of title up here. Right? Just to make sure that you're getting the habit of doing it. because on the exam, if you don't have some kind of title, it's wrong. Okay? All right. Then you'll see that they just put the choices, the individual choices. They put the number of times each one happened, but they wrote it as number, but the frequency, number, and percent, they put it in one column. Generally, these are done as two separate things. Doesn't really matter as long as but if you do, you need to label it number and percent. You just label it frequency and percent. That would be just as easy. And then you have your percents, and on the bottom, of course, you have your totals. Fairly straightforward. Pretty easy. All right. So that's one way to describe the categorical data. Another way is to use a visual graph. What we're going to use for these is a column graph. All right. When you're using a column graph, the height, of the vertical column represents the frequency. Or the percentage. So pay close attention to which type of graph they want you to use. Do they want you to just map out, just make columns depending on the frequency, or do they want you to make columns depending on the percentages? Okay, so to create these, first step is you need to create horizontal and vertical axes. So, for example, the bottom one there is a horizontal axis. The one going up and down is the vertical axis. Again, if you don't label them carefully, then you're going to have problems. And the general label that you're going to use for the vertical one is simply frequency. But if you're measuring percentages, you would label that percentages. All right. So percentages or frequency.
Percentages.
Or frequency. Yeah, either one of those is an acceptable title. Along the bottom, you're going to have your categories. So category 1, category 2, category 3, etc. You must also create a title for your graph. You must tell what the graph is all about. C sub 1, C sub 2, C sub 3, category 1, category 2, category 3. Okay, for example. Right. Now, you need to create an appropriate scale for your vertical axis. If you have 80 different, some of the frequencies of 80, you wouldn't want to count in ones. It would just make no sense. You might count in 5s or 10s, but don't make it such a big number that you lose the ability to read the detail, right? If you count in 5s, then halfway between 5, you'd know it's about 2.5, right? But if you count in 20s, then it's really difficult to get enough detail to be able to read the graph. You need to make sure that you're working with numbers that make sense. Okay? You also don't have to start at 0. But if you don't start at 0, you betcha. you do that little zigzag thing. So the bottom of your graph will look like that. Now, that's pretty rare with frequency charts, but you could do it if the numbers are really large. There's no reason to put, if the numbers are all over 100, then the smallest number you should put on your chart is 100, right? But to indicate that you skipped a bunch of numbers, you need to make that little zigzag at the bottom. And trust me, if you don't, there'll be points taken off, okay? And again, that simply indicates that you didn't start at 0. Otherwise, we always assume you started at 0, even if you don't label it. Okay. Once you've done that, then you're just going to create columns for each category. And again, the height of the column represents the height, the number of times it happens. So say, for example, we were doing 1, 2, 3, 4 here. And I drew a column this high. That means that whatever category 1 was, there were 3 responses for that. The frequency was 3. Okay? And the only important thing that you need to remember about those columns is that they must not touch. So when you're doing the second one, say it was only 1 response, we'd go up like this. Now, if those were percentages, you would simply put the percentage numbers on the side and of course, change the label. And then whatever percent, you would raise that bar to that percentage. Okay? Now, I'm assuming none of this is new to you. You've seen these before and worked with them before, but just to make sure you remember the critical parts of them. Make sure you've labeled them, use an appropriate scale, and make sure that the columns never touch. If you want, you can also put the number, the height of the number at the top. If you're going to be asked to do any work with these, it's important to read those numbers. And if you put those numbers at the very top, then it makes it really clear what they are, so that when you're looking at the column, you know that that's 3 units high, or 3 people, or whatever measurement you're using. It's not included in the homework ones, but it's not a bad idea. Okay. So let's just pop to the book and look at one of these. So the column charts, also known as bar graphs. So you have 2 different types, the column chart and the percentage. So you see that they've labeled the vertical one frequency. All right. So the side will be frequency, the categories along the bottom, and the heights. Notice they chose an appropriate scale, counting in 5s, but they also marked the 1s off so that makes it easy to read. Okay. The only difference with the percentage one is that your frequencies will become percentages, and you need to make sure you make that change. Make it change to percentage, and then make bars of the appropriate height.
So they tell you which ones to come in.
Mm-hmm. And they will make sure they will always make sure you know, do you want a frequency column chart or a percentage? Okay. And that's it.